Welcome to Noir Classics.
Chapter 1. The coal that had no fire every Tuesday morning, before the milk bottles stopped sweating, and before New York had fully decided whether the day would be honest or crooked, a coal scuttle appeared by the front door of the brownstone. No one knew who set it there, no one heard a knock, no one saw a retreating back. It was simply present, as if the house itself had coughed it up from some old winter it had not quite digested. On the 4th, Tuesday, I found it myself. It was 8:30. Fritz was in the kitchen composing breakfast with the solemnity of a liturgy, and Wolfe was in the office giving himself over to the last 6 minutes before beer, which he considers a period sacred to reflection. I opened the front door to get the morning paper, and there it sat on the top step, black, squat, ugly, and patient. I carried it inside and set it on the hall table. The thing was old, with worn brass trim and a handle that had known better decades. There was dust on it, but not the random dust that settles from neglect. This had been applied. The top was heaped with what looked like coal fragments, but when I tilted it, the material shifted too lightly. It made a dry, papery sound. I took it to the office. Wolfe looked up from his chair. His eyes moved from my face to the object in my hands, and then back to my face, which was his way of implying I ought already to know better.
"What is that?"
He asked. "A coal scuttle. I am not blind, Archie. Why is it in here? Because it arrived at the front door, like an invitation from the 19th century. He put down the slip of paper he had been glancing at. Again. That got me. Again. He frowned. Rosa mentioned last week that some black receptacle had been left outside. Fritz dismissed her. I dismissed them both. It seemed domestic and therefore beneath notice. That was rash. It may contain the secret treaty between Paraguay and Hoboken. It more probably contains dirt. Open it if you must. I set it on the rug, bent, and lifted the top layer with my fingers. The supposed coal came up in a fitted tray. Underneath, arranged neatly in the belly of the scuttle, were 6 black lumps the size of small fists. They looked like coal until you touched them. Then you knew they were hollow. I picked one up and cracked it against the rim. It split. Inside was a folded piece of white paper. Wolfe said, "Read it silently first. If it is idiotic, spare me." I unfolded it. "If Nero Wolfe wishes to prevent a death next Tuesday, he will wait. No police." I read it aloud anyway. Wolfe shut his eyes. That can mean several things. It can mean intense thought. It can mean contempt. It can mean he is restraining a desire to throw the nearest object, preferably me, through a window. Since I had no wish to test which, I cracked the other false lumps open. Each held a note. 2nd Tuesday, watch the man who sells warmth and lives cold. There are 4 men and 1 woman. 2 are lying already. The name you need is not the name that was born. When the ashes are stirred, look for blue. The dead man does not know he is dead. I laid them on Wolfe's desk. He opened his eyes and looked them over one by one. "Well," I said, "our correspondent favors brevity, drama, and a deep attachment to heating metaphors." Wolfe grunted. "He favors concealment. The writing is educated, compressed, and carefully impersonal. That is not dramatic, that is defensive." Still anonymous. "Yes, which is either prudent or cowardly. Can it be both?" "Frequently." He read the first note again. "Tuesday, the repetition is deliberate. We are being timed. Archie, get Fritz and Rosa." I went and fetched them. Fritz entered with the expression of a man interrupted in an artistic act by barbarians. Rosa followed him, nervous and eager, already prepared to agree with whatever seemed safest. Under Wolfe's questioning, the facts came out. A coal scuttle had appeared on the front stoop every Tuesday for the last 3 weeks. Neither had opened it. Fritz had pushed it aside once with his foot. Rosa had lifted it on another occasion and nearly dropped it because it was lighter than it looked. Both had assumed the other knew about it. Neither had told me until this morning because in this house oddities compete for attention. "No one knocked?" Wolfe asked. "No, sir," Rosa said. No vehicle waited outside. How would I know? I do not live on the stoop. Wolfe's lips twitched. That counted as hilarity. He dismissed them. I said, so our ghost comes between dawn and breakfast and leaves us literature. Possibly not a ghost, possibly someone who belongs in the neighborhood, or who believes he will not be noticed there. Anion who approaches this house with a coal scuttle ought to be noticed. Yet he was not. The doorbell rang. I looked at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at me. Go, he said. In the hall I opened the front door and found a man who looked as if he had been assembled out of bank statements and committee meetings. He was around 50, compact, carefully dressed, with iron-grey hair and a face that had learned long ago not to reveal more than the market required. See, Edwin Ralston, President, Ralston Domestic Fuel Corporation. That was neat, he said. I must see Nero Wolfe at once. Must is a strong word, but come in. I took him to the office and introduced him. Wolfe inclined his head a fraction, which in his etiquette is nearly a bow. Ralston sat only after Wolfe gestured. Mr. Wolfe, I came because I have received anonymous notes. They concern my family. This morning I decided the matter is no longer ignorable, Wolfe said. That is a clumsy word, but a useful condition. Explain. Ralston reached into his coat and removed an envelope. For the past 3 weeks, parcels have been delivered to my home. Each contained a false lump of coal with a note inside. He handed them over. I read them while Wolfe watched his face. A fire can start in a furnace or in a family. Count your household before Tuesday. If one is missing, Colorado Unt again. The man who changed his name still answers to the old one when death calls. You cannot keep heat in and truth out. I put them on the desk beside ours, Wolfe said. You see the coincidence. Ralston's eyes flicked to the scuttle and back. I do. Not coincidence, I said. Kinship. He ignored me. My company was founded in coal. We now handle oil, gas, heating systems. The old name remains. So does, perhaps, an old grievance. Wolfe nodded. Which grievance? Ralston hesitated. It was slight, but I saw it. Men who measure every sentence often tell the truth by delay before they tell it by words. 10 years ago, he said, my firm absorbed a smaller concern. The owner, Jonas Creel, was ruined. He died within the year, cause? Wolfe asked. Pneumonia after exposure. Exposure to weather? Ralston's mouth tightened. Yes, only weather. Ralston looked at him. I am not here to discuss rumors. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Then you are here in error. Rumors are often facts in shabby dress. Ralston drew a breath. There was a civil action connected with the purchase. A foreman named Daniel Mader gave testimony unfavorable to Creel. Later he disappeared. No charge was brought. Nothing was proved. And Creel had family. A son perhaps estranged. It was said he later changed his name. Wolfe touched one of the slips with a finger. The name you need is not the name that was born. Ralston glanced at it and then away too quickly. I said, you know more than perhaps. He turned to me. I know that people like to improve themselves with new names, Mr. Goodwin, and sometimes with old murders. That got a flash from him, brief, but genuine. Wolfe said, your household. My daughter Louise, my sister Julia Vanner, her husband Paul Vanner, my confidential secretary Helen Ives, who often works at the house in the evening, and myself. That is 4 men and 1 woman only if arithmetic has recently collapsed. Miss Ives is not a member of the household. Yet the note may count her, Wolfe said. What occurred this morning to make you come here now and not last week? Ralston paused again. My daughter informed me she intends to marry a man I know almost nothing about. Name Adrian Dale. Occupation. He claims to be an industrial designer. Claims. He has excellent manners, vague antecedents, and appeared too conveniently. I said, that makes him either a rascal or a suitor. Ralston did not smile. I prefer to know which before the wedding. Wolfe leaned back. Very well, I will take the case. Ralston gave the smallest visible sign of relief, which for him amounted to dropping a sandbag. Good. Archie will go with you now. He will inspect your house. Meet these people and report. You will answer all his questions fully." Ralston rose. "Of course." Wolfe added, "No police. No private heroics. If you conceal facts from me, you will pay my fee and gain nothing." Ralston said, "I understand." I collected the notes, got my hat and coat, and followed him out. As we rode uptown in his sedan, I tried a few easy probes. He parried them all with the polished caution of a man who had spent years avoiding liability in both law and conversation. He remembered nothing exactly when. Exact memory would have been useful. He did not know where Adrian Dale had come from. He did not recall who had introduced him to Louise. He doubted the notes had any present connection with the Creel affair, while obviously fearing precisely that. The Ralston house on East 68th wore money quietly. No guilt shrieking from the walls, no furniture chosen for autobiography, good rugs, deep chairs, discreet paintings, flowers placed by someone who knew flowers should look inevitable. The library, where I was shown, had shelves that seemed actually red, which improved my view of the place by a full point. The young woman standing by the mantel turned as we entered. She had dark hair, clear grey eyes, and an air of straightforwardness that would have been restful if it had not been mixed with stubbornness. "Louise Ralston. No question. Father. This is Archie Goodwin. He is here for Nero Wolfe." She looked me over. "The detective." I shook my head. "Only the moving parts." That brought a quick small smile. "Then I hope you move efficiently." Before I could answer, another voice cut in. "Efficiency is seldom what exposes the truth. Patience does." The speaker was Mrs. Julia Vanner, Ralston's sister, handsome and severe, with the kind of face that suggested she had never forgiven the world for needing management. Beside her stood Paul Vanner, broad-shouldered, blonde in an assisted way, and carrying strain under a layer of social polish. This was the brother-in-law who had vanished for 36 hours and returned with no explanation. A moment later, Helen Ives came in. She was slim, composed, and so still she almost vanished into the room until you looked straight at her. Secretaries with that degree of quiet usually know where the bodies are buried and who chose the cemetery. Then the last man entered without announcement. He was in his middle 30s, tall, dark, well put together, with a cool blue gaze and a manner that managed to seem easy without ever becoming careless. "Adrian Dale," he crossed to Louise at once, not touching her, which told me more than touching might have. Ralston said, "Mr. Goodwin is making inquiries for Mr. Wolfe. Your presence is unfortunate, Mr. Dale." Dale's eyes shifted to me and back. "Since I expect to marry your daughter, I would think my presence is unavoidable." That stirred the room. Louise lifted her chin. Julia Vanner went stiff. Paul Vanner looked as if he wanted a drink or a disappearance. I said pleasantly, "Good. I dislike interviewing a cast one actor short." Dale said, "And what exactly is the play?" I took one of the slips from my pocket and held it up. The sort that begins with fake coal and a promise that someone will be dead by next Tuesday. No one moved. Miss Ives spoke first. Her voice was low and perfectly steady. "So it has begun." Every head turned to her. Ralston said sharply, "Helen, what do you mean?" She looked at him with an expression too calm to be innocent. "I mean exactly what I said." Before anyone could press her, a shot cracked somewhere above us in the house. Chapter 2. Dust has a memory. The Scuttle sat in the hall like an uninvited witness, while Wolfe returned to his orchids and I returned to my suspicions. The maid, steady but uneasy, insisted the vessel vanished by noon each Tuesday, always without anyone noticing who fetched it. I scraped a finger through the soot and found the dust layered too neatly, as though someone rehearsed neglect. Wolfe remarked that dirt, when properly arranged, can pass for innocence longer than a polished lie. That was after I got back from the Ralston house, and after I had made my report, which Wolfe received with the expression of a bishop being told that the choir had taken up pocket picking. The shot upstairs had not produced a corpse, only a complication. It had come from a small room at the back of the 3rd floor, once a nursery and now used for storage and occasional guests. The bullet had gone through a wardrobe door and buried itself in plaster. The revolver, a small nickel-plated .32, was on the floor by the window. No one admitted firing it. That, of course, improved the morning. The room had been empty when we burst in, though the window was up 2 inches and the curtains stirred. Louise Ralston had gone pale and angry at once. Julia Vanner looked more offended than frightened, as if gunfire in a respectable house were not alarming but vulgar. Paul Vanner had the sweaty forehead of a man who sees too many things at once and wants to claim none of them. Helen Ives stood very still, which was her specialty. Adrian Dale was the coolest of the lot. He looked at the hole in the wardrobe, as if judging whether it had been placed there tastefully. I asked questions and got the usual return on that investment. No one had been upstairs. No one knew the revolver was there. No one had touched the window. No one had anything useful to say about Helen Ives's remark. So it has begun. Except Helen Ives, who said she had meant only that anonymous threats often lead to ugly performances. She said it with such composure that I marked her down either for uncommon honesty or excellent preparation. I stayed another hour and picked up bits. Louise admitted she intended to marry Adrian Dale, whether her father liked it or not. Ralston admitted he had engaged a lawyer without telling Louise to look into Dale's past. Julia Vanner admitted nothing but implied everything, chiefly that Dale was a fortune hunter and Louise a fool. Paul Vanner admitted he had been absent from the house for a day and a half the previous week, but refused to say where. Helen Ives admitted she had typed confidential letters for Ralston relating to an old acquisition dispute, though she claimed not to have read them. Since secretaries who type letters without reading them belong with mermaids and honest ward healers, I did not believe her. Dale, when I finally got him alone for 2 minutes in the hall, smiled and informed me that men of Mr. Ralston's generation are apt to think any suitor without a family bank is a criminal. That did not make him one, but it nudged him. By the time I returned to West 35th Street, I had enough names and attitudes for Wolfe to chew on, and he chewed with appetite. He sat at his desk, eyes half shut, fingertips together. Report. Once to ask exactly where the revolver had lain in relation to the window. Once to ask whether Dale had shown annoyance or amusement at being questioned. Once to ask the precise wording of Helen Ives's remark. When I finished, he grunted. If we, a room full of people, and not one of them with the decency to be simple, that would have hurt your feelings. It would have spared me time. He asked for the notes again. I handed over both sets. Ours from the Scuttle and Ralston's from the false coal parcels. He arranged them in 2 rows and read them once more. Then he sent me to fetch the Scuttle from the hall. I brought it in and set it beside his desk. He bent, peered at the interior, and then ordered, "Tilt it." I did. More. A thin black drift slid from beneath the fitted tray and onto a sheet of newspaper I had placed under it. Not much. Only a spoonful or 2, but enough. Wolfe leaned forward. "Not coal dust," he said. "It looks like it. It behaves too neatly. Coal dust is irregular. This has been sifted." I pinched some between finger and thumb. It was finer than it should have been, and there were tiny, dull grains that caught the light. Almost blue. I said, "Blue." Wolfe's eyes rose to me. "Yes. One note instructed us to look for blue when the ashes were stirred. Archie, whoever prepared this, wished us to find it, but not too soon. Or wanted to be sure we only found it after we had been impressed by the ceremony." Quite. I took the tray out, examined the belly of the Scuttle, then the underside. Around the rim, beneath the brass lip, was a narrow groove. More dust had been packed into it, almost artistically. This was no random grime from a cellar. It had been laid on by hand. "Rehearsed neglect," I said. Wolfe nodded. "Dirt, when properly arranged, can pass for innocence longer than a polished lie. That is the kind of sentence that makes clients pay large fees and me do the walking." I took the dust to the little work table by the window and spread it with the tip of a knife. Mixed with the black powder were tiny fragments of something grey, white and one narrow thread of blue wool, no longer than a fingernail paring. "Aha," I said. Wolfe did not look up. Do not crow state. Blue thread. Fine wool, I'd say. He held out his hand. I gave it to him. He looked at it, then laid it carefully on the blotter. Possibly from a sleeve, possibly from upholstery, possibly planted. That cheers me. The object of evidence is not to cheer. The door from the hall opened, and Fritz came in to announce lunch. He saw the scuttle on the rug, and frowned as if I had parked a horse indoors. That thing again, he said. I tell Rosa, if strange rubbish comes to the door, tell Mr. Goodwin. But no, women see dirt and think it belongs to a man. I said, console yourself, this dirt belongs to several. He sniffed and departed. At lunch Wolfe ate beautifully and thought heavily, which he can do without visible strain. Afterward, during coffee, he said, Archie, the disappearance of the scuttle every Tuesday, by noon, is intolerably interesting. You think the messenger comes back for it. Obviously, it is reused, which means the scuttle itself matters, either as a symbol, a convenience, or an object connected with the old case. Ralston said it might be from Braining and Soul, a housewares firm on 4th Avenue. Yes, find out whether it still exists. And if so, what became of its records? Also, inspect the stoop tomorrow morning before sunrise. If the scuttle can arrive unseen, perhaps it can depart unseen for the same reason. Carelessness is often only routine we have not yet learned. I nodded. One thing more, he said. Helen Ives. You like her? Number. I distrust efficiency in a witness. She spoke as one who had been waiting for the overture. That can mean guilt. It can mean knowledge. Guilt is only one of the possible uses for it. I rose to go. At the door I turned. And Dale. Wolfe opened his eyes. Either a man under a false name or a man chosen to appear like one. At present I do not know which would be more troublesome. That afternoon I put in calls, shook 2 small trees, and got 1 plum. Braining and Soul was gone, but not extinct. It had been absorbed years earlier by a metalware concern in Queens. A retired salesman named Osborne remembered the decorative coal scuttles with brass lips. He remembered them because they had sold badly, except to one commercial buyer who had taken a dozen at a discount. Who? I asked. Some fuel company office, he said. Wanted them as Christmas displays or some foolishness. Old files might show it. What company? He had to think. Then he said, Creel and Company, I believe. Jonas Creel's concern. That was worth the car fare. When I got back to the brownstone with it, Wolfe was in the office, receiving the day's last mail, as if each envelope might contain an insult, which often they did. I gave him the name. He sat very still. Then he murmured, Good. The scuttle is not merely theatrical. It points backward, to Creel, yes, and therefore to the acquisition, the vanished foreman Mada, the estranged son with the altered name, and the household of Mr. Edwin Ralston, who has omitted something central. The front bell rang. He went to answer it. On the stoop stood Helen Ives. She wore a dark blue suit, gloves, and the expression of a woman who had finished deciding to do something dangerous, and would now prefer not to discuss the decision itself. I must see Mr. Wolfe, she said. About what? About the man Mr. Ralston says is Adrian Dale. I took her to the office. Wolfe looked at her once and said, Sit down, Miss Ives. You have remembered something. She sat. Number, I have recognized something. What? She took off one glove finger by finger, as if buying herself 5 seconds, then looked straight at Wolfe. The first time I saw Mr. Dale, I thought his face was familiar. Today I knew why. 10 years ago, when I was working for another firm, I saw a photograph in a file. It was labeled with a different name. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. What name? She said it quietly. Adrian Creel. Chapter 3. The broker in the back parlor that afternoon. A visiting broker named Lionel Dane arrived with a face made for caution and shoes too clean for comfort. He had hardly crossed from polity into business when he was found in the back parlor, dead between the red leather chair and the window, as if the room itself had cut him off mid-sentence. There was no shattered furniture, no theatrical struggle, only a silence, so exact it felt prepared. Wolfe said, "Murder rarely enters through the front door unless someone has first opened the house to lesser crimes." The death came at 20 minutes past 4, which was bad timing even for murder. Wolfe had finished with the orchids. Fritz was in the kitchen engineering an early dinner sauce with the concentration of a siege commander, and I had just got Helen Ives out the front door after extracting all I could from her without putting thumbscrews on the furniture. She had held to it. Adrian Dale, she said, was not Adrian Dale at all, but Adrian Creel, son of Jonas Creel, the man whose business Edwin Ralston had swallowed 10 years before with legal appetite and social indifference. She had seen an old file photograph in another office, just once, but she was sure. Not legally sure, maybe, but the kind of sure that makes your nerves shift in their chairs. Wolfe had not thanked her. He had only asked whether she had told anyone else. "Number, will you?" "Number, not yet." "Good. Go home. Say nothing." She had stood, put her gloves on carefully, and then hesitated at the door. "Mr. Wolfe, if Mr. Dale is Adrian Creel, then someone has been waiting a very long time." Wolfe had grunted. "So has justice. It seldom improves with age." She had gone. I was still standing in the hall, thinking that over, when the bell rang again. The man on the stoop was lean, dark and dry-faced, with the guarded expression of someone who had spent years moving money for other people and trust for none. His overcoat was good, his tie sober, his shoes polished beyond reason. He gave me a card. "Lionel Dane Brokerage and Fiduciary Services. I have an appointment with Mr. Wolfe," he said. "You don't," I told him, "but come in anyway. We're running a charitable institution for the anxious." He did not smile, which I had expected. Men who live by caution seldom waste any on amusement. I took him to the office and introduced him. Wolfe looked displeased on principle. "Well?" Dane sat on the yellow chair, as if it might contain legal exposure. "Mr. Wolfe, I came because this morning I received a telephone call advising me, in language both obscure and disagreeable, to settle an old account before Tuesday." Wolfe's lids lowered. "What account?" "I do not yet know whether it is financial or personal." "That is an answer for a fool." Dane's face pinched, but he controlled it. "Very well. 10 years ago I handled the transfer of certain securities during the acquisition of Creel and Company by the Ralston concern. That gave me a small inward click. We were collecting the set. And," Wolfe said, "and I believe someone now thinks those transfers concealed more than they should have." "Did they?" Dane looked at me, then back to Wolfe. "Not in any criminal sense." "Then in some other sense," Wolfe said. Dane's fingers tightened on his hat brim. "There were irregularities, pressure. Some documents were backdated. Some assets were valued according to convenience. It was not my firm's work, but it passed through my hands. I objected mildly and was overruled by men with louder interests. Names: Jonas Creel, Edwin Ralston, and a foreman, Daniel Madder, who was useful to one side until he became dangerous to both." I said, "Dangerous because he knew too much, or because he talked too much?" Dane glanced at me. "Is there a profitable distinction?" "Only for the undertaker." Wolfe leaned back. "Why come now? Because the caller said this. The dead man does not know he is dead, but the broker should know his turn is next." That sharpened the room. One of our anonymous slips had said exactly that. First clause. Wolfe held out his hand. "Write down the words exactly as you remember them." Dane complied. His handwriting was narrow, careful, and joyless. When he had finished, Wolfe said, "You were threatened. Why not the police?" Dane gave a flat little smile. "Because the police would ask questions whose answers might inconvenience my clients, my former associates, and perhaps myself. I prefer discretion." "Yes," Wolfe said. "That preference is the mother's milk of many future corpses." Dane rose abruptly. "Mr. Wolfe, I did not come for reproach. I came to retain you." You came too late for comfort and too early for candor. Sit down. Dane had just lowered himself again when the house phone on Wolfe's desk rang. I picked it up. Fritz's voice came from the kitchen extension, tight as piano wire. "Archie, come at once. The gentleman in the back parlor is sick or dead." I looked at Wolfe. Dane, he was already moving his eyes toward the office door. "Go." I went fast, with Wolfe behind me as fast as he ever goes, which is not fast, but arrives all the same. The back parlor sits behind the office and is usually employed for overflow, concealment, or the reception of people Wolfe would rather not let soak into the furniture of his own room. Dane had asked, on entering, for a glass of water. Fritz, with his usual reluctance to nourish strangers, had sent him there to wait while he fetched it. We found Lionel Dane on the floor between the red leather chair and the long window that looks onto the narrow yard. One arm was crooked under him, the other stretched out with 2 fingers, nearly touching the leg of the chair. His head was turned toward the window. His face had gone the color of old paper. There was no blood, no overturned furniture, no sign that he had struggled with anyone or anything larger than his own surprise. Fritz stood by the door with the untouched glass in his hand and offense all over him. "I was gone half a minute," he declared. "Maybe 3/4. I come back, and there he is. I did not touch him." He looked once, thoroughly. "Archie, no police yet. First inspect." That was Wolfe all over. A man was dead on his floor, and he wanted the room interviewed before the city got there to blunder through it with official shoes. I knelt by Dane. He was dead enough. There was a faint dark mark low on the left side of his neck, just above the collar, no larger than a pencil eraser. I touched his wrist, then his coat. One pocket held a wallet, another a key case, another a folded paper. I left them where they were. "Needle," I said. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. I looked around. The room was as orderly as a moral lecture. The chair was in place, the small table beside it undisturbed, the curtains hanging straight. The window was closed but not latched. On the table stood a bronze ashtray and a magazine. Under the window was a narrow ledge holding 2 potted ferns that Theodore had condemned months ago, and Fritz had kept alive out of stubbornness. On the carpet, near Dane's right hand, was a tiny black smear. "Dust," I said. "From what?" I bent closer. It was not dust alone. Mixed in with it was a minute blue. Grey fleck, the same curious cast I had seen in the Scuttle soot. I rose. "That again." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Yes, I checked the window. The sill outside was clean except for one faint scrape in the paint and a darker speck clinging at the edge. Beyond it was the strip of yard, the brick wall, and the service passage leading to the street gate. A man could enter that way only if he already knew the terrain or had luck enough to deserve prison on another matter." "Possible," I said. "Everything is possible," Wolfe snapped. "Which possibilities are decent?" I pointed to the neck mark. A jab through the window while Dane stood near it. He was seated or preparing to sit. Then from inside. Wolfe grunted. "Better." I straightened. "We call Kramer now." "Yes, and before he comes, the folded paper in Dane's pocket." I took it out carefully and unfolded it. It was a single sheet torn from a legal pad. On it were 4 names written in Dane's narrow hand. Dedwin Ralston, Paul Vanner, Adrian Dale, Daniel Marder below them. One line only. The wrong man vanished. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it and shut his eyes once. Briefly, "Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Then lock the front door. No one enters, no one leaves. And if Mr. Kramer bellows, let him. He does it better than most men breathe." I went to the office phone and made the call. Kramer was out, but Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins was found, informed, and promised. When I came back, Wolfe was still in the doorway of the back parlor, staring at the dead broker with an expression I knew well. It meant that the pieces had ceased to be merely interesting and had begun to align. I said, "Needle in the neck, soot on the carpet, a note about the wrong man vanishing, and our broker dead in your house. That seems untidy even for this case." Wolfe opened his eyes. Untidy. Number, it is becoming very neat. That worries me more. It should. Someone has moved from warning to action, the error, Wolfe said, looking down at Lionel Dane, is that he did it here. Then the doorbell began to ring, hard and repeatedly, with the impatient authority that meant either the police had arrived or someone equally convinced that other people's houses existed for his convenience. Chapter 4. Tin beneath the ash with Inspector Kramer prowling and me keeping pace. Wolfe ordered the coal scuttle emptied onto newspaper in the office. Beneath the black fragments lay sealed tin capsules, each small enough to hide in a palm and plain enough to escape interest. Inside them were folded promissory notes. Unrecorded obligations, unsigned in the right places, but worth enough to make greed sit up straight. Wolfe concluded the scuttle had not been carrying fuel at all. It had been carrying debt in mourning clothes. Kramer did not enjoy having a corpse in Wolfe's back parlor and a puzzle in Wolfe's office at the same time. He enjoys most things that way. By the time he arrived with Pearlie Stebbins and a police surgeon, the brownstone had already taken on that strained feeling a house gets when official feet are trampling its habits. Fritz was offended. Theodore, who had come down from the roof on hearing unfamiliar voices, was offended in a quieter and more spiritual manner. Wolfe, who can treat a police invasion as if it were an unpleasant weather condition, sat at his desk and saved his temper for precision. Kramer came in large and red, around the edges. Well, he barked. A man comes here to see Wolfe and winds up dead on the floor. You running a detective agency or a slaughterhouse? Neither, Wolfe said coldly. And your wit has not improved with rank. Kramer swiveled to me. Archie, give it. I gave it. Lionel Dane had arrived, had spoken of threats tied to the Creel, Ralston business, had written down the words used in the telephone threat, had begun to name names, and had then asked for water. Fritz sent him to the back parlor. In less than a minute, he was dead. I handed over Dane's note with the 4 names and the line beneath them. Kramer read it, grunted, and looked sourer. The wrong man vanished, he said. That's supposed to mean something. Yes, Wolfe said, eventually. Kramer glared at him. If you know something, spill it. I know only that a man has been murdered by means not yet established, and that this murder is connected to a series of anonymous warnings delivered by a coal scuttle. Archie, bring it. Pearlie had just entered the office with the scuttle from the hall, carrying it as if he expected it to bite. I spread newspapers on the rug. Wolfe pointed. Empty it. Kramer frowned. What for? Because, Wolfe said, that offensive object has consumed enough of my attention to have earned the courtesy of thoroughness. I took out the false tray with its staged dust and tipped the remaining contents onto the paper. Black fragments slid out first, not coal but the same brittle imitation material, broken small. Then came a dry sift of powder, then a harder sound, metallic and brief. 3 dull cylinders rolled free and stopped against the leg of Wolfe's desk. Pearlie bent. What the devil? They were tin capsules, each about the size of a man's thumb, capped at both ends and blackened with dust. Plain things easy to overlook if you weren't looking, which we now were. Kramer snapped. Don't touch them. I already intend to, Wolfe told him. Archie. I fetched tweezers from the drawer, handed them to him, and Wolfe lifted one capsule by its middle. It was not soldered shut, merely pressed. I opened it over the newspaper. A tightly folded paper slipped out. Promissory note, that was clear at once. Private form, not bank paper. A debt acknowledgement for $25,000, payable on demand. No witness, no proper filing marks. One signature complete, the other line blank. Kramer took a step closer. Give me that. No, Wolfe said Pearlie, who knows the terrain better, took it from my hand when I offered it and passed it to Kramer. We opened the other 2, more notes. Different sums, larger. One for 40,000, one for 15. All were obligations in favor of Jonas Creel, and all were defective in the same way, unsigned by the debtor or signed with initials only. Enough to compromise, not enough to collect cleanly in court. Kramer's face changed, not into comprehension, but into appetite for it. Blackmail paper. Not necessarily, Wolfe said, though blackmail would be one available use. I looked at the dates. Old, 10 years. Yes, Wolfe said. Contemporary with the acquisition, hidden, preserved, and now circulated. Kramer stared at the scuttle. So, somebody's been dropping this junk on your stoop? Yes. And why, in God's name, didn't you tell me before a man got himself killed? Wolfe's eyes flashed. Because until this afternoon there had been no murder, only anonymous communications and the possibility of one. I do not report possibilities to the police. They have enough trouble with facts. Kramer swore. I picked up one of the notes and scanned the names. The creditor was Jonas Creel in each case. One partial debtor signature looked like another. Was PV the third was only a scrawl that might once have hoped to be legal. Widwin Ralston, Paul Vanner, I said, and a third. Wolfe nodded. Yes, debt in mourning clothes. Kramer shot him a look. Save the embroidery. Wolfe ignored it. Inspector, these are not ordinary obligations. They are private instruments, apparently concealed outside the books of any business involved. Their existence implies leverage. Their concealment inside the scuttle implies someone wishes them discovered gradually, not seized all at once. I said, fed by teaspoons to whoever knows enough to be frightened. Pearlie, leaning over the newspaper, murmured, or greedy. Wolfe pointed at him. Exactly. Fear and greed are the two proper readers of such documents. Kramer turned to me. Who knew about the scuttle? Rosa, Fritz, Wolfe, me and Ralston. After this morning, also the people in his house, indirectly, once I mentioned the threats. Kramer's head jerked. You mentioned them in a room full of suspects. It seemed sociable. He gave me a glare and went back to the notes. Unsigned, half-signed, private debts, worthless in court. Not worthless in life, Wolfe said. A man shown such a paper may pay to prevent questions, scandal, tax scrutiny, or the reopening of old fraud, particularly if one of the men is now dead, one vanished, and one perhaps living under another name. That landed, Kramer said slowly. Daniel Marder. Yes, Pearlie blinked. The name on Dane's paper. The wrong man vanished, Wolfe repeated. If Marder disappeared, but should not have, someone else was intended to, or someone else should have been made to disappear in the record instead. Kramer scowled. That's fog. Number it is an unfinished sentence. He looked as if he wanted to bite a chair. Meanwhile, the police surgeon appeared at the office door and announced his preliminary opinion. A puncture at the neck, probably from a fine instrument. Poison possible, autopsy to tell, death swift. No sign of prolonged struggle. Needle, I said. Could be, said the surgeon. Could be a narrow spike. If so, whoever used it knew where to place it. He went away again with his men and their body, leaving behind that emptied feeling. A room gets after death has been physically removed, but not socially cleared. Kramer stayed, of course he stayed. Wolfe had me arrange the notes in a row on the blotter. He examined them again, then the tin capsules, then the tray from the scuttle. Under stronger light we found more of the blue-gray dust in the seams, and a smear of something brighter on the inside wall of one capsule. I touched it with a knife point. Grease. Sealant, Wolfe said. Industrial, not domestic, perhaps to keep moisture out. That narrows New York to 7 million. Do not be frivolous, Kramer said. What's with the blue dust? Wolfe settled back. I do not yet know, but it was deliberately included. One note instructed us to look for blue when the ashes were stirred. Therefore, the blue is not residue but signal. Someone wished us to recognize a source. Source of what? Perhaps a place, a process. A business we shall see. I said, coal, old fuel company, industrial sealant, staged dust, hidden debt papers, and a murdered broker who handled the original transfers. It all starts to look as if Creel's ghost had bookkeeping habits. Wolfe grunted approval without admitting it. Kramer pocketed copies of the notes Pearlie had just made and said, I'm getting warrants, statements, and every file on Creel, Ralston, and this broker Dane, also your precious Adrian Dale." "Good," Wolfe said. "Do so with unusual speed, for once." Kramer rounded on him. "And you stay put." Wolfe's brows rose. "I always do. That was for Archie." "That," I said, "is cruel, also probably ineffective." After Kramer left, taking noise with him, the house quieted by degrees. Fritz resumed his kitchen campaign. Theodore returned to the roof. Pearlie's footsteps faded. Wolfe looked at the open capsules on his desk as if they had personally insulted the Constitution. "At least now we know why the Scuttle was retrieved each Tuesday," I said. "Not to save the prop, but to save whatever remained inside until the sender was ready for the next installment." "Yes," Wolfe said, "measured disclosure. Not panic, not impulse, design." "And Lionel Dane got killed the same day we found the first real contents. Not same day because." That was Wolfe distilled. I waited. He tapped one of the notes. "Dane knew or suspected these existed. He came here because he feared exposure. Someone learned he had come, or expected he would. Therefore the murder was either followed or anticipated." Then I said, "Cheerful." Wolfe ignored that. "Tomorrow you will see Ralston again. You will ask him whether he signed any private notes to Jonas Creel, whether Paul Vanner did, and what relation either debt had to the acquisition. He will lie, observe how. And if he throws me out, re-enter verbally." I got up to take the newspaper and debris away. "Archie." I turned. Wolfe's eyes were half shut. The Scuttle did not carry fuel. It carried leverage. A man was killed before he could tell us how much it was worth. And to whom, that means the next move will be quicker. By us, number by the person who is losing control. The front bell rang at that hour, with a corpse only recently departed, and tin capsules still open on Wolfe's desk. The sound had a flavor I didn't care for. I went to answer it. On the stoop stood Adrian Dale. He was bareheaded, as if he had come in haste, and in the hall light his face looked less smooth than before. The coolness was there, but not quite under command. "I must see Nero Wolfe," he said. "About what?" He met my eyes. "About Jonas Creel's notes, and about the man who was murdered before he could sell them twice." Well, Chapter 5. Tuesday was the password, once the capsules were laid out. The weekly ritual became less a curiosity than a timetable. The coal delivery at the curb gave cover. The Scuttle by the door signaled receipt, and someone inside or near the house used habit as a lock that required no key. Every Tuesday, the notes moved in or out beneath coal scraps, disguised as the city's dullest necessity. Wolfe observed that routine is a splendid accomplice, because respectable people mistake repetition for legitimacy. Adrian Dale came into the office with the look of a man who had decided to abandon caution, only because caution was now too expensive. He had kept his hat off, which suggested urgency, and he remained standing until Wolfe told him to sit. Wolfe did not waste the courtesy. "You are late," Wolfe said. Dale's brows moved. "Late for what?" "For candor, sit down." Dale sat. I stayed by the desk corner, where I could watch both of them and enjoy the view if either one decided to become foolish. On Wolfe's blotter, the tin capsules lay open beside the defective notes, looking harmless enough to be sold as cough lozenges. Dale's eyes went to them, stayed a shade too long, and came back. He said, "I know what those are." "Of course," Wolfe said. "The interesting point is why." Dale crossed one leg. "Because my father used to keep records in odd places. He believed hiding a paper in plain ugliness was safer than locking it in elegance." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Then you are Adrian Creel." Dale did not answer at once, which was answer enough for me. Finally he said, "That was my name." "Was. I changed it legally." "Why?" He gave a small shrug that was not careless, only tired. "Because a ruined man's son inherits more than debts. He inherits doors closing before he reaches them." I said, "And one of the closing doors belonged to Louise Ralston's father. That must have added sparkle to the courtship." Dale glanced at me. I did not meet Louise to avenge anyone, Wolfe grunted. That is what men say when motive embarrasses them. Dale leaned forward. You think I came into that house under a false name to destroy Edwin Ralston? I did not. I came because I wanted to see the man who had broken my father and gone on dining well. That is not a denial, I said. He ignored me. Then I met Louise, Wolfe's voice was dry, and discovered that revenge and romance can occupy neighboring rooms. Dale's mouth tightened, but he let it pass. I knew about some papers, not these specifically, but enough my father kept private obligations from men he dealt with when he thought they might prove useful. He trusted no one, least of all the men who called him partner, while pricing his coffin. Names, Wolfe said. Ralston, certainly. Perhaps Paul Vanner, possibly Dane. My father never trusted brokers. I said, and Daniel Mader. That hit, not hard, but clean, Dale said. Mader was a foreman. He handled more than shipments. He carried messages, arranged meetings, knew who was lying before the liars did. He meant to sell information to both sides and retire richer than either. Wolfe's finger touched Dane's note. The wrong man vanished. Yes, Dale said quietly. That was always the story underneath. The office settled around that. Outside, New York kept on being New York, with tires hissing on wet pavement and somebody a block off proving he had a horn. Inside, Wolfe's chair creaked once as he shifted. Explain, he said. Dale drew breath. After the acquisition began to turn vicious, my father told me one night that if anything happened, I was to remember Daniel Mader's name. He said Mader had taken something or someone out of the picture. He never made himself plain. He was proud enough to prefer riddles to admissions. Useful man, I said. He was drunk, Dale said. Useful is not the word. Wolfe's tone sharpened. What happened then? My father died. I found nothing. Years passed. Then, 3 months ago, I was approached by a man who claimed to know where certain papers from my father's old files had been hidden and how they had moved since. He asked a price for information. Lionel Dane, I said. Dale nodded. Yes. That was neat and ugly at once. He wanted money, Wolfe asked. He wanted protection first. He said if he handed everything over at once he would not live to spend the fee. I thought he was dramatizing. Now he is dead in your back parlor. Wolfe's lips tightened. When did he first contact you? In January. Then again twice in March. The last time was yesterday. He said Tuesday would settle everything. Tuesday, I said. The password. Wolfe nodded. Yes. He turned to Dale again. Who else knew Dane had contacted you? No one. I made a small noise with my tongue. Dale looked at me. No one from me. Better, I said. That leaves a more civilized number of leaks. Coal at the curb, coal in the cellar, coal on the stoop. No one notices fuel unless it fails. That was good enough to admire if you weren't the one being maneuvered. Wolfe gestured at the notes. You came because you recognized these. Why come now? Because if Dane is dead, whoever killed him will assume I know what he meant to sell. I don't, and because if Edwin Ralston learns who I am from anyone but me, Louise will hear it in the worst possible way, I said. You've had many chances to improve the way. Yes, he said, and I used none of them. I know. That had a sound I believed more than most of what I had heard from him earlier. Wolfe leaned back. You will tell Miss Ralston the truth. Not tonight. Tomorrow morning. In my presence or Archie's. Before then you will remain available and silent. You will not visit the Ralston house. Dale's face changed. I won't be barred from seeing her. You are not being barred. You are being managed. Accept the distinction. Dale stared, then gave a short nod. Very well. He rose. One thing more, Wolfe said. Miss Helen Ives recognized you from an old file photograph. Why has she remained in Ralston's employ while this history smoldered under her chair? Dale hesitated. Because Helen Ives knows where paperwork ends and loyalty begins, and she has never confused the two. That is almost an answer, Wolfe said. Go. When Dale had gone, I shut the door and came back. You buy him? I asked. In installments, Wolfe said. You think he loved Louise before or after recognizing the convenience? Wolfe made a face. Archie, men are not a borsy. Mixed motives do not cancel one another. They multiply. That's heartening. Number it is merely accurate. He had me spread the notes and capsules again while he dictated what he called simple inferences and what I called a week's honest labor. Tuesday deliveries had begun only after Dane renewed contact with Dale. Therefore, someone else learned that papers were re-entering play and revived the old transfer system. The scuttle by our door was not a threat alone, but a summons, or perhaps an invitation to witness. The person using it knew household rhythms, knew old fuel customs, and trusted repetition as camouflage. Routine, Wolfe said, is a splendid accomplice because respectable people mistake repetition for legitimacy. I wrote that down because when Wolfe is in form, even his contempt has structure. By 10 the house had gone quiet, except for the kitchen sounds of Fritz putting civilization away for the night. Wolfe sat with his eyes shut. I was on my third of the day's cigarettes, and considering whether the case would next provide blackmail, kidnapping, or only the usual lying, when the bell rang. At that hour it had no business ringing. I went to the door and opened it. Paul Vanner stood there. He looked worse than before. His tie was loose, his collar wilted, and his face had the shiny fatigue of a man whose nerves were no longer agreeing to remain indoors. I must see Wolfe, he said. You and half the city. I don't care. He pushed past me. Not hard, but with the determination of a man who has finally run out of corners to back into. In the office he stopped short at the sight of Wolfe, then of the open capsules on the blotter. That was enough. His eyes widened, not theatrically, but with true recognition and true fear. My God, he said. He found them. Wolfe opened his eyes. No, Mr. Vanner, they found me. Vanner swallowed. You don't understand. That is possible, Wolfe said. Improve matters. Vanner sank into the red chair as if his legs had submitted a resignation. 10 years ago Creel loaned me money. Private money, gambling debts, business foolishness. Call it what you please. He took notes, more than one. He said they were insurance later. When the merger was breaking apart, he hinted he held papers on everyone. Ralston, me, Dane, maybe others. After Creel died, I thought they were gone. And were they? Wolfe asked. Number someone wrote to me 6 weeks ago. No name. Only one line. Tuesday still counts. I burned it. He looked at the capsules again. I should have known, I said. You vanished for 36 hours last week. Why? He licked his lips. Because I was trying to buy them. That gave me pleasure. Not because it helped, which it did, but because it was one more piece clicking into Wolfe's tray. From whom? Wolfe said. I never saw him clearly. Messages came through a locker at Grand Central, then a phone booth, then a room in Jersey. The man never appeared. Only instructions. Bring cash. Wait. Leave. It was absurd. I went anyway. And paid. Number, I was told the terms had changed. Then I was warned off. By whom? Vanner's face did an odd thing, part anger and part shame. By my wife. That was worth sitting up for. He nodded. She knew, or guessed enough. She told me if I paid once I would pay forever. She said someone was using old debt to reopen old cowardice. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Did she say who? Number. But she said this, and I remembered it because it sounded like her. She said, when men begin moving the same object on the same day every week, they are not hiding money, they are speaking a language. Tuesday was the password, I said. Vanner looked at me blankly. Yes, that. Wolfe was silent for a moment. Then he asked, why come here tonight? Vanner's hands gripped each other. Because Lionel Dane is dead, and if those notes are out, I am finished unless the right man is stopped first. The right man, Vanner met Wolfe's eyes. Daniel Marder. The room held that. I said, you think Marder is alive? Vanner gave a cracked little laugh. Think, Number, I know it. I saw him last Thursday. That was how Chapter 5 ended for me, with Wolfe not moving at all and me feeling the air in the office change shape. Chapter 6. The men who owed and the men who collected. I traced the names tied to the notes and found a crooked little street of obligation, a builder overextended, a club owner hiding losses, a broker balancing 3 lies against 1 collapse. Lionel Dane had served as broker not merely of funds but of silence, handling promises too dirty for bank paper and too delicate for open blackmail. He had visited Wolfe that day because something in the Tuesday chain had broken, and he no longer trusted the hands at the far end of the Scuttle route. Wolfe said a man begins to fear murder the moment profit stops flowing in the expected direction. Paul Vanner's statement that he had seen Daniel Marder alive last Thursday had been good enough to keep me awake half the night and Wolfe awake for at least 11 seconds, which for him is near frenzy. By morning he had converted it into labor, most of which became mine. "Go," he said after breakfast, while I was still improving my coffee with the hope of human kindness. "Verify Vanner's debts, Dane's side traffic, and Marder's resurrection if possible return, with facts and no poetry. I save the poetry for funerals. You save nothing. You squander." Still, I went. The first stop was a builder named Harold Bricks, who had once been respectable enough to get his photograph in trade circulars and was now respectable enough only to avoid small creditors while fearing large ones. His office on Lexington smelled of damp plans and old postponements. Bricks himself was broad, grey and sagging at the corners, like a man who had been overpoured into his own suit. At the mention of Lionel Dane he stiffened, which was promising. "I had business with him," he said. "Brokerage. That covers a multitude." He gave me a sick look. "Private advances, bridge money, temporary accommodation," in English. He licked his lips. "Loans." "From whom?" He hesitated long enough to remind me why I dislike honest answers that need coaxing, "From men who preferred not to appear in the documents." "Creel." He stared. "Long ago. How do you know that name? By scholarship. Did Dane arrange paper between you and Jonas Creel?" "Yes, once. Then twice. It got folded into other obligations. Dane handled everything. He always handled everything. Did he keep copies?" Bricks gave a bitter little laugh. "Mr. Goodwin, men like Dane are copies. The originals are only accidents." That was better than I had expected from him. I pressed. He admitted that private notes had existed. Some signed outright, some left deliberately ambiguous, useful not for collection in court but for persuasion in private rooms. He also admitted that 3 weeks earlier he had received a call asking whether he wished certain old papers returned or merely buried. He had hung up and then spent 2 nights not sleeping. "Did the caller name Tuesday?" I asked. "Yes, that gave the ritual one more witness." From Bricks. "I went downtown to a club on West 52nd, run by one Nicky Vale, who had somehow remained solvent by treating books the way sentimental people treat family history, revising them whenever pain appeared. Vale wore velvet in daylight and a smile bought wholesale. He knew Dane too. "Lionel," he said. "Neat little undertaker in a collar." "Did he broker funds for you?" "He brokered forgetfulness." "Same question." Vale shrugged. "Once or twice, small matter. Not small now. He's dead." That stopped him, not much, but enough. He poured himself a drink before noon, which told me either he was a fool or frightened. Often the first makes way for the second. He admitted losses, hidden ones covered years ago, through private paper arranged by Dane and backed, at least in part, by Creel money. He had thought all such obligations had died with Creel. Then, one Tuesday a month ago, an envelope arrived containing a fragment of an old note and one typed line, "Accounts may yet be warmed." "Cute," I said. "I didn't think so. Did you pay?" Number I waited. Nobody called again. That was instructive. Whoever was running the Tuesday chain had not cast a net over the whole city. Selected fish only. Back at the office in mid-afternoon, I gave Wolfe the first bundle. He listened with his eyes shut, which is his best way of looking harder. "Dane," he said when I finished, was not only handling money, he was curating vulnerability. I thought you'd like that. I do not like it. I recognize it. He had me sit while he arranged the names again. Edwin Ralston, Paul Vanner, Lionel Dane, Daniel Marder, Harold Bricks, Nicky Vale. Old loans, side agreements, unsigned notes, and obligations that could not survive sunlight but could do excellent work in the dark. A broker, balancing 3 lies against 1 collapse, I said. Wolfe grunted. Yes, Dane trafficked in silence. That was his true commodity. And then the commodity spoiled. Or escaped. I went back out, this time to the old financial district offices where Dane had kept rooms. Kramer had already had men through them, but one advantage of not being the police is that clerks talk to you for reasons besides fear. A bookkeeper named Sutter, who had the pale skin of indoor arithmetic and the nerves of a ferret, was willing after 10 minutes, and a cigarette. Yes, he said. Mr. Dane had private clients separate from the official books. Nothing illegal that I saw. He flinched. Good sign. He handled introductions, temporary placement settlements, cash against paper, collections, sometimes, for Creel. Years ago, yes, then later for people who had inherited matters from Creel. Inherited or stolen, he spread his hands. Mr. Goodwin, in that trade the distinction often comes down to whether the dead left clear labels. Did Dane seem frightened recently? Sutter's answer came too fast. Yes. Why? He said the Tuesday arrangement had become unsafe. That clicked. What arrangement? Sutter swallowed. He never told me plainly, only once. Last week, he said. When the same package stops reaching the same hands, men begin inventing murder to restore confidence. That was a Wolfe sentence by a crooked road. I thanked him and went home. Wolfe was at his desk. I gave him Sutter's line. He nodded at once. Precisely, the chain broke. The weekly scuttle. Yes, a courier system disguised as habit. A package dropped under cover of fuel deliveries, picked up by someone who knew the hour, moved again without record, not sentimental symbolism. Logistics. And then one Tuesday the wrong person received something, or failed to receive it. Panic follows. Dane, who understood the mechanism, ceased to trust the hands at the far end. And came here. To buy safety with disclosure. Too late. Wolfe's face made its hard shape. A man begins to fear murder the moment profit stops, flowing in the expected direction. That was the center of it, and I knew it. People will tolerate danger for money. It is uncertainty they cannot abide. I was about to say so when the bell rang. I went. Helen Ives came in, composed as ever, but her composure had a crack in it now. I need 2 minutes, she said. I took her to the office. Wolfe looked up. You have one. She ignored the economy. Paul Vanner told the truth about seeing Daniel Marder. He saw him because I arranged it. That opened the room, I said. You arranged a reunion with a vanished foreman. You do choose odd errands. She turned to me. It was not a reunion. It was proof. Wolfe's voice cut clean. State it. She did. A month earlier she had received an unsigned note instructing her to come alone to a small hotel near the river if she wished to know whether the old papers still existed. Their mother showed her one of the tin capsules, let her hold it while he boasted of the route, and took it back before saying too much. She went. There she met a man calling himself David Marr, older, heavier, with a damaged left hand and the eyes of someone who trusted walls more than people. She recognized him. After a minute, as Daniel Marder from an office photograph she had once filed years ago, he admitted the name. He said he had stayed dead because living had become expensive. Why show himself now? Wolfe asked. He said the papers had gone astray. He believed Lionel Dane had resumed moving them through the Tuesday route and was cheating on the division. Division with whom? He did not say. Why involve Paul Vanner? Because Marder wanted Vanner frightened enough to pay and honest enough not to summon police. He overestimated both, I said, and underestimated murder. She looked at me. Yes, Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Where is Mudder now? I don't know. I was told he changed hotels twice. The last message I received instructed me to forget him. Did you? Number that at least was sensible. Wolfe leaned back. Miss Ives, why have you remained in Edwin Ralston's office, among these people and these buried accounts, unless you have a private stake? For the first time since entering, she lost control of her face. Not much. Enough. My father worked for Jonas Creel, she said. He was the bookkeeper who refused to alter one ledger. After the acquisition, he was dismissed. Within a year, he was dead. I stayed near the matter because someone ought to remember it accurately. No one spoke for a moment. Then I said, "Dust has a memory." She looked at me and nodded once. Wolfe said, "And now memory has become expensive again. Good. Go home, lock your door, and admit no one except Archie or the police." She stood. "Am I in danger?" "Yes," Wolfe said. At last, after she had gone, I turned to him. So Dane handled silence. Marder handled disappearance. Helen handled memory. Ralston handled survival. Vanna handled debt. And Adrian Dale handled a name change. Wolfe snorted. "You make them sound like a cast list. They are a mechanism. Which part kills?" He looked at the row of names, then at Dane's dead broker note. "The collector," he said. "Always the collector. Debtors fear exposure, but collectors fear interruption. Dane died because he stopped trusting the route. Madder will die if he has not died already. And the next move, Archie, will come from the person who cannot afford the old papers to become history instead of leverage." The bell rang again. At that hour I was beginning to take it personally. I went to the hall, opened the door, and found Louise Ralston on the stoop, pale, bareheaded, and carrying a folded sheet in one hand, as if it had burned her all the way downtown. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "Adrian has disappeared, and this was left in his rooms." She handed me the paper. It contained only 5 typed words. Tuesday collects what Tuesday lends. Chapter 7. The Maid, the Hall, and the Half. Truth, the maid admitted she had noticed more than she first confessed. On 2 mornings, she had seen a gentleman caller pause, half a second, too long near the door. Enough to read a signal, but not enough to seem guilty. She had stayed quiet because servants survive by learning which truths belong to them and which belong to their employers. I pressed her until she recalled a faint smell of tobacco and the scrape of a cane ferrule on the tiles. "Wolfe." "Patient now," said the smallest. "Withheld detail often props up the largest falsehood. Louise Ralston's appearance on our stoop with Adrian Dale missing and a typed threat in her hand was enough to make the evening respectable only in the technical sense. Wolfe received her in the office with more courtesy than he gave most distressed heiresses, which is to say he did not actively bite. She sat straight in the red chair, holding herself by will alone. She had changed nothing since leaving her house except perhaps her certainty. That had been shaken. "He is gone," she said. "His landlady says he left in the afternoon and did not return. His rooms were in order. This paper was on the desk." I handed it to Wolfe again. He read the 5 words, grunted, and put it beside the others. "Tuesday collects what Tuesday lends." "Did Mr. Dale say he intended to leave town?" Wolfe asked. "Number, did he know you were coming here?" "Number, I went first to his rooms, then to you." That pleased Wolfe enough not to show. "Good." She looked from him to me. "I want the truth. All of it. My father has behaved as though I were 10 years old and likely to burst into tears if anyone mentioned money. Adrian has behaved as though he could arrange facts to suit me later. I am tired of being protected by liars," I said. "That condition has a large membership." Wolfe ignored me. "Miss Ralston, Adrian Dale is Adrian Creel." She did not flinch the way most people would. She only shut her eyes once and opened them again. "I know," she said. That improved the room. "You know," I said. "He told me an hour ago." Wolfe's brows rose a fraction. "Ah, he came to the house after dinner. Father refused to see him. I saw him in the morning room. He told me his real name, and enough of the old history to make me sick, he said. He had meant to tell me sooner. Men always mean to do the honorable thing, she added with contempt. 5 minutes after it stops being useful. That was crisp, I admired it. What else? Wolfe asked. He said Lionel Dane had tried to sell him information. He said the papers everyone seems to be chasing were once my father's danger, and are now everyone's, he said. If he vanished before tomorrow, I was to come here. Number. He mentioned no meeting, no appointment, no errand tonight. Number, that was all she had. And enough to be troublesome. Wolfe sent her home in my car with instructions that she admit no one except her father, the police, or me. She left angrier than when she had arrived, which in her case was healthier than fright. After that, Wolfe sat silent for a full minute. Then he said, "Tomorrow morning, Rosa." The maid. Yes. She has known more from the beginning. That is one of Wolfe's least mystical gifts. He can hear omission the way a musician hears a wrong note. I had questioned Rosa 3 days earlier, and got from her only anxious denials and domestic offense. Wolfe had heard something in the shape of them. So the next morning, before breakfast had fully earned the name, I fetched her into the office. She came in wiping her hands on her apron, already defensive. Rosa is not old, not young, not stupid, and not courageous in any theatrical way. She belongs to that large army of women who keep houses upright while their employers practice emotional collapse in the drawing room. Wolfe looked at her. "Rosa, sit." She sat on the edge of the yellow chair, as if prepared to leap from it if accused of silver theft. "You told us," Wolfe said, "that the coal scuttle appeared on Tuesdays and vanished by noon, and that you saw no one place it or remove it." "Yes, sir." That was incomplete. Her mouth tightened. "I said what I knew." "Number, you said what you dared." She looked at me, then back at Wolfe, and I knew he had her. Not by force, by accuracy. That is Wolfe's favorite instrument. I said mildly, "Rosa, a man is dead. Another may be dead by now, and if you hold back one more useful crumb, I may be cross." That gave her something simpler to resist than Wolfe's gaze. She shook her head, then stopped, because she knew better than to lie twice in one breath. "On 2 mornings, she said at last. "I saw a gentleman at the door." Wolfe's lids lowered. "When? The 2nd Tuesday and the 3rd. "At what hour?" "Near 11, maybe later." "Describe him." "That is the trouble," she said helplessly. "He was ordinary." I said, "Those are often the expensive ones. Try." She pressed her hands together. "A dark coat, hat, gloves." He did not ring. He only came up the step, stopped by the door, and then walked away. "Stopped how?" Wolfe asked. She blinked, half a second. "Only like this." She demonstrated with a tiny pause, absurdly eloquent. As if he were reading something or waiting for something, then he went. "Why did you not tell us?" She looked offended now, which was a better sign than panic. "Because I am not paid to turn callers into crimes. In houses like mine before this one, if a servant noticed too much, she became the trouble. So you learn. Some truths belong downstairs and some upstairs, and if you mix them, you lose your place." That had enough truth in it to make me stop pushing for a second. Wolfe did not soften, but he became patient, his face. I did not see it well. Hate. A little taller than Mr. Goodwin. Build. Thin, but not poor thin. Dry thin, I said. That describes half the brokers in Manhattan. Her eyes jumped to me. Maybe. He had a smell. Wolfe's head moved. "Ah, not perfume," she said hurriedly. "Tobacco. Strong. Bitter. Not cigarettes. The other kind." "Pipe tobacco?" I asked. "Number not sweet. Sharper. Cigar." She thought. "Maybe. But not fresh, like it had lived in the coat." Wolfe nodded. "Good. Anything else?" She bit her lip. "A sound." "What sound?" When he turned. Something scraped on the tiles. "Metal, quick." I felt my back straighten. Cain ferrule. Her face brightened with relief. "Yes, that could be it." "Did he limp?" I do not know. He moved evenly, but there was that sound. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. Excellent. Now, Rosa, attend. Did the gentleman approach the scuttle? I think so. It was near the door both times. I could not see from the pantry, only the edge. Did he remove it? Number, when I looked again, it was still there. That was interesting. Not collector, then reader, or confirmer, I said. He paused long enough to read a signal. Wolfe nodded once. Yes. Rosa wrung her apron. Have I done wrong? Certainly, Wolfe said, but not fatally. Go. She departed with the complicated dignity of someone relieved and resentful at once. I turned to Wolfe. Dry thin hat, gloves, tobacco in the coat. Cane ferule, pauses at the door twice around 11, reads the setup, leaves the scuttle untouched. Who uses a stoop as a bulletin board. Summoner who expects a second party to act later, Wolfe said. The scuttle by the door signaled receipt. Its continued presence signaled readiness. Our gentleman caller came not to fetch, but to verify. Dane, possibly. He was thin, correct, cautious. He didn't use a cane, that you know of. I thought it over. Paul Vanner, number too soft. Ralston, too self, important to skulk. Julia Vanner. Wolfe snorted. A cane ferule, Archie. Do not be whimsical. That left me with the people I had not seen enough of, which I dislike because unknowns have bad manners. I spent the next 4 hours on feet and telephone, revisiting details people had already been paid to forget. By noon, I had one useful return. Lionel Dane had, in fact, used a cane on wet days and in winter because of an old ankle injury from a riding fall, though he often left it in cabs or outer offices when he wished to appear younger than his liabilities. The information came from his clerk Sutter, who added that Dane smoked narrow black cigars and kept them in his overcoat pocket long after they had gone stale. When I brought that back to Wolfe, he closed his eyes. The gentleman caller was Dane, I said. Yes, he was checking the signal at our door on the 2nd and 3rd Tuesdays. Yes, but he didn't collect. So who did? Wolfe's lips moved. Someone later. Someone whose entrance or exit could be hidden by routine inside or near the house. The Ralston house. Not ours. The chain did not end here. We were inserted into it. That was clean and nasty. Someone had redirected the message route through Wolfe's stoop for a reason, either to enlist him, warn him, or use him as cover. None of those made me cheerful, I said. And Dane got frightened because the chain changed. Precisely, he came to confirm the scuttle was being received and perhaps to judge whether I had understood it. When he realized I had, he tried to buy safety with disclosure, too slow. I lit a cigarette, and Wolfe glared at it, as if nicotine itself were a personal affront. All right, the smallest withheld detail props up the largest falsehood. Rosa holds back the caller, that proves the caller mattered. Dane checks the signal, that proves he was not master of the route, only participant, which means whoever ran it was someone else. Very good, Wolfe said, making it sound like a rare and regrettable accident. The bell rang. He had begun to dislike that bell on principle. I went to answer it and found Inspector Kramer on the stoop with Pearlie behind him and Weather on both of them. Kramer came in growling. I got news. Condolences, I said. He ignored me and stamped into the office. They found Adrian Dale's car. Wolfe looked up. Where? Near Weehawken and empty. No blood, no Adrian, but that's not the sweet part. He took a paper from his pocket and slapped it on the desk. Fingerprints from one of your tin capsules. I leaned in. Whose? Kramer's face had the mean satisfaction of a man who gets to improve an ugly picture. Lionel Dane's, he said, and Helen Ives. Chapter 8. A killer, who needed clean hands the cane and the tobacco, led first to Lionel Dane, and through Dane to Edwin Marr, a sober-faced financial advisor, whose respectability had been ironed flat and pinned in place. Marr had arranged the note traffic, used Dane to negotiate desperate borrowers, and used the coal scuttle because soot would cling to no ledger and answer no subpoena. But Dane had begun keeping a private record, hoping to buy safety with knowledge if the operation soured. Wolfe saw the line clear enough. Marr killed not to gain the notes, but to keep from being measured by them. Inspector Kramer, having delivered the news that one of the tin capsules bore both Lionel Dane's prints and Helen Ives, remained in the office to enjoy the effect. But the fact of Helen's contact still lacked an explanation. He did not get as much of one as he wanted. Wolfe merely frowned. I, who was willing to give a man his due where melodrama is concerned, whistled softly. "Helen," I said. "That is unpleasant." Kramer snorted. "You think, maybe your cool secretary isn't as cool as she acts." Wolfe's eyes half closed. Or perhaps Miss Ives handled one of the capsules at some earlier stage, very likely when Mada showed her part of the hidden traffic in order to prove the papers still existed. The existence of fingerprints proves contact, not murder. Even the police know that on feast days. Kramer gave him a look meant to scorch linen. "I also know Dane's prints on one capsule put him in the traffic for sure." "Yes," Wolfe said. "That part is useful." Pearlie, who had the better sense, said, "We also got something on your dead broker's office. A memorandum book in a concealed drawer. Not full accounts, more like reminders. That was interesting enough to improve my blood circulation." Kramer pulled a small notebook from his pocket and tossed it to me. "Copies only. The original stays with me." The pages contained dates, initials, sums, and short notes in Lionel Dane's thin handwriting. Most were no good to me cold, but a few stood up at once. "Tuesday. EM confirmed receipt. PV delay again. Nervous. Wife knows. Act impatient, dangerous if crossed. I saw more than she should, and 3 days before his death. Ma wants clean closure. Impossible now." I handed it to Wolfe. He read the entries without visible pleasure. Then he read them again. "With Ma," I said. "Yes." Kramer grunted. "Who the devil is Edwin Marr?" "A financial advisor," I said slowly. "At least that's what Helen said Daniel Mudder had been calling himself when she met him. David Marr." Wolfe shook his head. "Number that was camouflage. Too near. No Archie. Edwin Marr is another man, and probably the true center." Kramer jabbed a finger. "Then start from the beginning and use words a cop can carry." Wolfe ignored the insult because it was routine, and therefore beneath notice. "We have an old system of concealed obligations, originating with Jonas Creel. We have Lionel Dane, broker of silence and paper. We have weekly Tuesday exchanges, disguised as fuel deliveries. We have Daniel Marder, vanished foreman, now apparently alive and trying to sell leverage. We have Miss Helen Ives, who knows too much. And now we have Edwin Marr, who confirmed receipt and desired clean closure." "That phrase interests me. Why?" I asked. "Because only a man whose life depends on appearing unsullied uses moral laundry language for criminal bookkeeping." Kramer scowled. "You saying Marr arranged the whole thing?" "Yes, Dane handled borrowers. Marder handled disappearance and pressure. Marr handled respectability. He made dirt presentable. That had the right smell. Within an hour I had Marr, or rather, I had his office, which was on Madison in rooms, so clean they looked laundered rather than furnished. Brass discreet, carpet expensive, receptionist efficient and bloodless. Edwin Marr himself received me after 8 minutes, meant to prove his time was worth more than mine. He was in his late 40s, spare, sober, and polished to the point of abstraction. Grey suit, white cuffs exact, hair parted like a legal opinion. His face was not memorable in feature, only in effect. The effect was trustworthiness strained through a wire screen until all warmth had been removed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I understand you are with Nero Wolfe. How may I help?" That kind always says help when they mean defend. Men like Marr do not waste surprise on witnesses. "I'm afraid I know nothing of Mr. Dane's private notes. He's dead." "Yes, I read that in the evening edition. Disturbing. Not for everyone." He folded his hands. Clean hands. Literally. Nails neat. Fingers narrow. Not a stain on them. It made me think of Wolfe's phrase. "Did you know Jonas Creel?" I asked. Slightly. Did you know Edwin Ralston? Of course, Paul Vanner. Yes, Helen Ives, a secretary in Mr. Ralston's office. Daniel Madder. A pause, brief. But there, the name is familiar. Adrian Creel. That one nearly landed. He turned it into composure half a second too late. I would prefer, he said, to know why you are asking these questions. Because a broker is dead. A vanished foreman is alive. A young man under an old name has disappeared, and somebody has been moving debt papers in a coal scuttle like a squirrel with a law degree. His mouth thinned. I think this interview is over. Sure, one more thing. You use a cane? Number, that was a lie. And a practiced one. I could see the stand in the corner of his office, where an umbrella and a slim walking stick had stood until recently. There was dust for one, not the other. I got up. Thanks. You've been a jewel. At the door I turned, Mr. Marr. Did Dane begin keeping a private record because he no longer trusted you? That gave me the flicker I had come for. Small, cold and mean. Then it was gone. When I brought it home to Wolfe, he was having coffee and contempt. I gave him both Marr and the concealed note copy. He nodded. Yes, a killer who needs clean hands. That's your man, almost certainly, because he lies flat. Because he is the only figure yet named who profits from remaining untouchable. Ralston fears scandal, Vanner fears debt. Dale fears exposure, Helen fears the past. Madder fears death, Dane feared all of them, Marr alone feared measurement. I sat, meaning. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Dane's notes, incomplete as they are, suggest Marr was the receiving point, not the noisy extortionist, not the sentimental avenger, but the custodian. He arranged traffic, used Dane to negotiate with borrowers, and used Tuesday routine to move papers where books could not record them. The scuttle was ideal. It looked beneath interest. Soot clings to nothing official and answers no subpoena. That's pretty. It is exact. I lit a cigarette. Why kill Dane in this house? Because Dane changed function. He was no longer a broker of silence alone. He began keeping a private record. Insurance men like Marr can forgive greed, incompetence, even cowardice. They do not forgive a clerk who starts an independent archive. I nodded. Dane wanted to buy safety with knowledge. Yes, but knowledge is only useful while others do not know you possess it. Once they do, it becomes a death warrant. That was neat enough to frame, I said. All right. Marr arranged the note traffic, used Dane to talk to the debtors, used Madder as the old ghost to keep fear alive, used Tuesday as the schedule because habit hides in daylight. Then the chain cracked, Madder resurfaced. Dane got scared. Adrian Creel came into the picture. Helen remembered too much, and Marr started cutting loose ends. Very good, Wolfe said, which meant it was probably right, and he disliked my having said it first. The bell rang. I went Helen Ives again. She entered with less poise than before, not much less, but enough to measure. She sat and took off one glove. I know who Edwin Marr is, she said. Wolfe grunted. So do we. Improve it. He was not only a financial advisor. 10 years ago he was brought into the Creel transaction as an outside consultant to regularize certain private accommodations. That was the phrase used. My father hated him. Why? I asked. Because Marr could turn any stain into a memorandum. He had a gift for making dishonesty look provisional. Wolfe nodded. And after Creel died, he stayed near Ralston socially, near Dane professionally, and far enough from the paper to remain clean. My father once said, Marr never touched money when he could touch the man who touched it. That was good. Very good, Wolfe asked. Did your father leave records? She looked at him. One. From her bag, she took a folded sheet, old and yellowed at the edges. I opened it. Ledger paper, columns, dates, initials. Private advances arranged through Dane, backed by Creel funds, witnessed in part by D. Madder, regularized by E. Marr. At the bottom, in firmer writing, all private notes to be held off books until transfer complete. E.M. insists no signatures in full. He handed it to Wolfe. He smiled, not pleasantly. Wolfe's smile, when reason tightens around a human throat, is never pleasant. "Excellent," he said. Helen looked from him to me. "What now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "Mr. Marr will try to recover or destroy every surviving paper before I call everyone together and oblige him to fail." I said, "You're ready, nearly. Where's Adrian?" Wolfe's eyes moved to the old ledger sheet. "Alive, I think. Marr needs leverage before he can discard it." Helen went pale. "You mean he has Adrian?" "Perhaps. Or Madder has him for Marr. The distinction will matter for only a short while." That was as close as Wolfe comes to haste. "Archie, telephone Inspector Kramer. Then telephone Edwin Ralston and command his presence here tomorrow at 6. Also Miss Ralston, Mr. and Mrs. Vanner, Miss Ives, and if possible Mr. Adrian Dale, though I doubt he will arrive by invitation. Finally, arrange for Mr. Edwin Marr to attend. Tell him I have located the final note." I stared at him. "Have you?" "No," Wolfe said, "but if I am right, he will come because he cannot afford not to. That is Nero Wolfe in one sentence. He does not chase. He compels motion around a still center and lets guilt do the running." I went to the phone. As I lifted the receiver, the front bell rang again, hard, twice. I opened the door. Paul Vanner stood there with his coat half buttoned and his face collapsing inward. "He's dead," he said. "Who?" "Daniel Marder. They found him in a rooming house on 12th Avenue, and on the wall over the bed, written in soot, was one word." I did not have to ask, but I did. "What word?" He swallowed. "Tuesday." Chapter 9. The Tuesday reconstruction. Wolfe gathered Kramer, Marr, the maid, and the household in the office, and rebuilt the crime the way a locksmith rebuilds a broken lock. The scuttle had been set by the door as the collection sign. Dane arrived early, discovered capsules missing from the prior week, and confronted Marr in the back parlor before Wolfe's interview could begin. Marr, carrying his cane and his polished indignation, struck with a narrow instrument concealed in the handle, then meant to reclaim the capsules later under cover of official confusion. Wolfe said the murderer's error was trusting the dirt to stay on the floor and not in the mind of the only servant who truly watched the house. At 10 minutes past 6, the office was full to the edge of civility and no farther. Inspector Kramer occupied the chair nearest the globe, broad and simmering. Pearlie Stebbins stood by the bookcase with the expression of a man prepared to enjoy his superior's indigestion, if properly fed. Edwin Ralston sat rigidly upright, preserving dignity by force. Louise was beside him, pale but composed, the kind of composed that requires muscle. Julia Vanner had brought her disapproval, as if it were a shawl. Paul Vanner had brought nerves and worn them openly. Helen Ives sat very straight, hands folded, eyes intent. Rosa hovered near the door until Wolfe ordered her to take a chair, which she did as though sitting among employers and police might itself be actionable. Edwin Marr arrived last. He entered with exact politeness, faultless evening clothes, and the air of a man who has come to correct an administrative error. He carried no cane. That pleased Wolfe, who noticed and filed it away without visible triumph. Archie Goodwin, meaning me, had the wall by the filing cabinet, where I could see everyone and enjoy it if anyone fainted, lied badly, or attacked the furniture. Fritz had supplied beer for Wolfe and coffee for the rest, which no one wanted, but some took out of fear of seeming nervous. The room smelled of wool, tobacco, and anxiety. Outside, New York was having an ordinary evening, which always seems indecent when murder is being sorted indoors. Wolfe put down his glass. "Mr. Marr," he said. "Thank you for coming. Sit." Marr sat. "Mr. Wolfe, I was told you had found a missing paper." "Yes. I found several things. Their relation to paper varies." Kramer barked. "Skip the embroidery and get to it." Wolfe moved his eyes to him. "Number, I shall proceed in the only order that permits your understanding." He turned back. "This case began For me, with a coal scuttle left at my door on successive Tuesdays, it appeared and vanished according to a timetable no one thought worth observing, because routine is the most successful disguise ever devised by human laziness. Under false coal and arranged soot were hidden capsules containing defective promissory notes, relics of private obligations arising from the Creel Ralston transaction 10 years ago. Ralston's jaw tightened. Ma did not move. Wolfe went on. The notes were not meant to be collected in court. They were meant to compromise, alarm, and if necessary compel. They moved for years, by a chain disguised as habit. Tuesday was the password, but not merely as a word. It was a schedule, a system, fuel deliveries at the curb, ash and soot in every cellar, servants accustomed to unloved objects appearing and disappearing. A coal scuttle by a door looked like household dullness. In fact, it signaled receipt. He nodded to me. I crossed to the side table and placed the scuttle on the desk where all could see it. Rosa glanced at it as if it might accuse her of insufficient dusting. Mr. Dane, Wolfe said, was broker not merely of funds but of silence. He arranged dirty accommodations for men who feared publicity more than interest. Mr. Marr arranged the arrangements. Mr. Dane dealt with borrowers and debtors. Mr. Marr remained clean because men of his type prefer influence to fingerprints. Marr's voice came calm and flat. This is a grotesque speculation. Wolfe inclined his head. Of course, wait. That annoyed Marr a little. I saw it in the corner of his mouth. Small details. Wolfe feeds on them. Recently, Wolfe continued, the old chain broke. Daniel Marder resurfaced. Adrian Creel re-entered the picture under another name. Mr. Dane, perceiving instability, began keeping a private record. That record is now in Inspector Kramer's possession in part, and in my understanding in full enough. Mr. Dane hoped to buy safety with knowledge. That was sensible, but late. Kramer grunted. Marr remained still. Wolfe lifted a sheet from the blotter. On the afternoon of Dane's death, he came here frightened. He had discovered that capsules had gone missing from the prior Tuesday movement, or had failed to reach the expected hands. He no longer trusted the chain, and specifically he no longer trusted the man at its respectable center. He meant to bargain. Before he could complete that bargain, he was killed in my back parlor. Louise drew breath. Paul Vanner's fingers twitched together. Marr said, "You cannot prove I was ever in this house that afternoon before the official visit." "I can do better," Wolfe said. "I can prove you were in relation to it on previous Tuesdays, and that Mr. Dane used my stoop as a signal point because he no longer trusted direct contact with you." "Rosa," she started. "Tell them," Wolfe said, "what you saw." Rosa swallowed and looked at me first, as if I had brought her into this court and ought therefore to rescue her from it. I gave her nothing but encouragement. "On 2 Tuesdays, she said, near 11, a gentleman came up the step, did not ring, paused by the door, and went away. Only half a second, as if reading. I did not see his face clear." Kramer said impatiently, "That could be anybody." Wolfe nodded. "Indeed." So she withheld it. Then Mr. Goodwin questioned her further, and she recalled 2 details. The smell of stale dark tobacco in the gentleman's coat, and the scrape of a cane ferrule on the tiles, Marr said. "And from that fantasy you produce me?" "Number from that, plus Mr. Dane's known use of a cane in foul weather and his habit of carrying narrow dark cigars. We produce Mr. Dane as the observer on those mornings. He came not to collect, but to confirm that the scuttle had been received," Pearlie said. "Then who collected?" Wolfe's eyes flashed. "Precisely, not Dane. Someone later, someone who had reason to avoid the visible stoop, but every reason to profit from the chain continuing, Mr. Marr." Marr actually smiled then, very faintly. "On what logic?" "On the only kind worthy of the name. Mr. Dane's memorandum notes that. Marr confirmed receipt, and later that Marr wants clean closure. Mr. Dane also recorded that Miss Ives had seen too much, and that Mr. Vanner delayed because his wife knew. These are not the notes of a principal. They are the notes of an intermediary worried about a superior. Mr. Dane feared the arrangement had ceased to be profitable in the expected direction. That is when men like him begin visiting me. Kramer leaned forward. Get to the killing. Wolfe obliged. Mr. Dane arrived here early. He was shown to the back parlor for water before formal discussion. Mr. Marr, either having followed him or having anticipated the visit once the Scuttle route shifted to my house, also entered the brownstone. That seems impossible to you because no one announced him. It was not impossible. The front hall had already been opened repeatedly that day. My household was occupied. Mr. Dane had used the route before. Mr. Marr, neat and invisible in manner, required only seconds. Marr's voice stayed level. Absurd. Number efficient. In the back parlor, Dane confronted Marr over missing capsules and over his intention to bargain independently. Marr, who could not afford to be measured by the very debts he had trafficked in, used the weapon concealed in his cane handle, a narrow instrument, a spike or needle. The puncture in Dane's neck was exact, quick, and required proximity without struggle. A man may carry such a thing only if he trusts appearances. Marr lived by trust in appearances. Kramer's head turned sharply. The cane. Yes. Marr denied using one, yet Mr. Goodwin found the vacant stand space in his office, and Rosa heard the ferrule. Marr had begun to fear that even the accessory might betray him, so tonight he came without it. All eyes went to Marr's empty hands. He did not look at them. Wolfe pressed on. After killing Dane, Marr intended to reclaim the remaining capsules later, under cover of confusion, police presence, and household disruption. He failed because I had already ordered the scuttle emptied. Beneath the false coal were tin capsules that should not have been there in my office at all, had the chain worked cleanly. Ralston spoke for the first time. Why use Wolfe's house? Because, Wolfe said. Once Adrian Creel returned, and Daniel Marder began moving independently. The old route no longer guaranteed discretion. Wolfe's house was introduced as an involuntary neutral point. If the scuttle was received there, Dane could read the signal, and Marr could judge whether intervention was required. It was a desperate refinement. Desperation leaves fingerprints in conduct long before it leaves them on objects. Marr said softly, "This is clever. It is not proof." Wolfe nodded. "Quite right. Proof interests the police more than it does me, Inspector." Kramer had been waiting for that with the patience of a dog at table. He reached into his pocket and produced a folded paper. "We picked up a search warrant this afternoon," he said. "Marr's office after Wolfe called me with his bright ideas, and enough specifics to make a judge itchy, in a locked cabinet behind the accounting files. We found a cane hollow handle. Narrow steel spike, fitted inside with residue on the tip. Lab's still working, but the shape matches the puncture." No one spoke. Marr's face did not collapse. Men like him do not collapse. They reduce. Kramer went on. "Also found a packet of copied obligations, a schedule marked by Tuesdays, and a list of initials that matches Dane's memorandum book, a shade too sweetly to be coincidence." Paul Vanner made a sound like air leaking from a tire. Julia turned and stared at Marr with pure contempt, which was probably the first honest gift she had given the room. Wolfe was not done. There remains the matter of the dirt. Marr trusted soot. He used it because soot adheres to no ledger and answers no subpoena. But he forgot that dirt does not stay only on floors. It remains in minds. Rosa remembered the pause at the door. Mr. Goodwin found the blue-gray dust and the thread in the scuttle seam. Miss Eves supplied the ledger notation that all private notes be held off books and not fully signed at Marr's insistence. Dane's private record named Marr's desire for clean closure, and Daniel Marder, before his own death, had resumed pressure in a way that forced Marr from concealment into action, Louise said very quietly. And Adrian. For the first time that evening, Wolfe's tone softened by a degree. "Eliv." That struck the room harder than accusation had, Kramer said. "A patrolman found him an hour ago tied in a storage, shed off River Road in Jersey. Drugged, not hurt. Bad. It looks like Mader's work at first, and Marr's by instruction after that. Grab the boy, frighten him. learn what Dane had sold, and hold him until the papers were recovered. We were waiting to see how this played before dragging it in. I let out a breath I had not known I was holding. Louise closed her eyes once, then opened them steady. Wolfe turned back to Ma. "Your final mistake, sir, was not murder. It was pride. You believed yourself cleaner than the dirt you handled. But dirt is democratic. It settled on your root, your broker, your cane, and finally your judgment." Ma rose. It was not dramatic. No lunge, no speech, no cracked confession. He merely stood, looked once at Wolfe, once at Kramer, and said Lionel Dane had become impossible. Kramer was up in 2 strides. "That'll do." Pearlie moved in from the side. Ma did not resist as the cuffs went on. He only looked irritated, as if arrested by arithmetic. As Kramer took him toward the door, Wolfe spoke once more. "One thing, Inspector. Have him charged also in connection with Daniel Marder if the evidence permits. Men who tidy one danger seldom leave another unbrushed." Kramer grunted. I was already thinking it. "No," Wolfe said. "You were approaching it." Kramer gave him a look, but he was too satisfied to bark. When they had gone, the office emptied by layers. Ralston remained long enough to thank Wolfe in the stiff voice of a man who would rather have paid double, not to need gratitude. Louise did not thank anyone. She came to me in the hall and asked only, "He is truly alive?" "Yes." She nodded and left. Julia Vanner went out with her chin high. Paul behind her, looking as if acquittal and shame had decided to travel together. Helen Ives was the last of them. At the door she paused. "My father would have liked this," she said. "No," Wolfe told her. "He would have liked accuracy. Justice is merely the public version." After she had gone, the house settled. Fritz entered, surveyed the emptied chairs, and announced that dinner could now proceed without further interference from crime or guests. Wolfe sighed, rose heavily, and moved toward the dining room. I followed him. "Well," I said. "The dirt did not stay on the floor." "No," Wolfe said, "nor does folly. Remember that." "I try not to keep souvenirs," he snorted. "You keep all of them." And that was the end of Chapter 9, with the coal scuttle empty at last, the Tuesday mechanism broken, and one chapter still owing before the whole business could be called finished. Chapter 10. The coal scuttle by the door when Kramer took Ma away. The brownstone settled back into its ordinary comforts, though the front hall seemed less innocent than before. The scuttle, empty now, looked almost embarrassed, a household thing pressed into the service of men who believed grime could absolve design. Wolfe resumed his chair and his beer, declaring that filth earns an unfair amount of trust because civilized people prefer to think corruption arrives dressed up, not dusted over. I put the last coal fragment in an envelope for evidence and privately admitted, the old man was right. Sometimes the dirtiest trick is the one everyone agrees not to clean up. That ought to have been the finish. In most respectable detective stories, the murderer is named. The police remove him, the surviving characters exhale in chosen pairings, and the detective is left with nothing to do but accept gratitude and indigestion. Nero Wolfe has never had much use for respectable detective stories, chiefly because life will not keep to them, and because gratitude, when it appears, is usually spoiled by timing. It was a little after 8. Fritz had at last got dinner onto the table, and Wolfe, having borne interruption, police, terror, lies, and revelation with his usual bad grace, was restoring himself with duck, celery root, and a bottle of beer administered as if medicinal. I was on my second helping and improving in temper when the house phone rang from the hall. Fritz muttered something in German that would not have helped the digestion of a bishop. I got up and answered it. It was Louise Ralston. "Mr. Goodwin, Adrian is here. He has just come from the police. He says there is one thing Wolfe has wrong," I said. "That will interest him more than praise. Bring him." They arrived 20 minutes later. Adrian Creel, still Adrian Dale in posture, if not in legality, looked worn in a plain human way that did him credit. Drugging and confinement had taken the polish off him and left the man underneath. Louise came in beside him, not touching him, but close enough to show the question between them had not been closed by honesty, merely because honesty had at last shown up. Wolfe received them in the office because Wolfe receives everyone in the office, unless he intends to feed them, and he had already done his feeding. "Well," he said. Adrian remained standing. "You were right about Ma, about Dane, about the route, and about why I was taken. Ma wanted to know what Dane had told me and whether I knew where the last packet had gone." "The last packet," Wolfe said, "which I did not in fact possess." "Yes. But there is one thing you put in the wrong place. Daniel Marder did not kill for Ma. He was not Ma's creature at the end." "That," Wolfe said, "I had already suspected. Sit down and justify yourself." They sat. I stayed by the corner of Wolfe's desk with a notebook. I did not need but enjoy, because people tell the truth better when they think it may become permanent. Adrian said, "Maida contacted me directly 2 weeks ago after Dane failed to deliver as promised. He said Ma had begun cutting him out, keeping back papers, using Dane as a shield, and then planning to discard him. Marder wanted protection and a share. He was desperate, not loyal." Louise looked at him. "Why did you not tell us that before?" He met her eyes. "Because by then I was lying in batches and had not yet worked up the virtue to do it all at once. That was not elegant, but it was good enough for me." Wolfe grunted. "Continue." "Maida told me there was one final note, not monetary, hidden separately from the debts. He called it the only paper that mattered. He said if it surfaced, Ma would be finished even without the promissory notes." I said, "What kind of paper?" Adrian drew a folded sheet from his inner pocket. "This," he handed it to me. I gave it to Wolfe. It was old, typed, and signed in full at the bottom by Edwin Ma. Not an obligation. A memorandum, brief, careful, poisonous. It stated that Daniel Marder had been paid to remove one Jonas Creel from a scheduled meeting on the day certain transfer documents were executed, and to substitute, in effect, a false absence. The wording was cautious, but the meaning was not. Creel had not merely drunk himself out of a fight. He had been maneuvered away from it, deceived, shut out of the room in which the final handling of his own collapse had been arranged. Wolfe read it twice and handed it to me. "Yes, that does matter." Louise had gone white. My father knew. "No," Adrian said. "I don't think so. Ma wrote it for his own protection. Insurance against Marder, perhaps, or against Dane. Marder told me he stole it years ago and kept it hidden apart from the notes because it was more dangerous than the notes." I said, "Then why didn't he use it?" "Because," Wolfe said, "men who live by leverage almost never spend the last coin until they are starving." Adrian nodded. "Maida meant to use it now," he said. Tuesday was no longer about money. It was about forcing Ma into the open. Then Ma found him first. That settled the last gap neatly enough to suit even Wolfe, which is saying something severe. Wolfe leaned back. "So, Ma managed the old debt traffic, Dane the silence around it, and Marder the original disappearance that permitted the fraud to mature. Later Marder tried to reverse his own extinction into profit. Ma, needing clean hands, made corpses instead." Louise said quietly, "And my father." Wolfe looked at her with unusual directness. "Your father is guilty of arrogance, concealment, and a complacent use of men more crooked than himself. He is not, on the evidence before me, guilty of murder." That was harsh enough to be kind. She nodded slowly. There was a silence then, not empty, only finished. The kind that comes when all the important lies have already been used and have nowhere left to stand. That is one of the few wise economies I practice. I said, "So the final paper was hidden apart from the rest. Marder tried to sell fear in installments. Dane tried to insure himself against the collapse of the system. Ma killed to keep from being measured by records. He had once controlled, and all of it rode in under a coal scuttle, because civilized people don't look twice at dirt." Wolfe picked up his beer. "Exactly. Filth earns an unfair amount of trust, because civilized people prefer to think corruption arrives dressed up, not dusted over. I put the old memorandum into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote on the front in block letters for Kramer's benefit, though not his pleasure. Then I added the last false coal fragment from the desk corner, because evidence likes company, and because I had grown to dislike the thing personally. Adrian rose. Mr. Wolfe, I have no right to ask anything further, but if Louise chooses to have anything to do with me after this, I should prefer it not be on the basis of half-truths. That, Wolfe said, is the first sensible preference you have displayed. Miss Ralston, if you are wise, you will demand boredom from him for 6 months. A man who has lived under 2 names should be made to endure one steadily before he is trusted with another person. Louise almost smiled. Thank you, I think. You are welcome, I do not think. They left together after the door had closed. Fritz entered, looked at the used cups, the envelope on my desk, and the empty scuttle still visible through the open office door in the hall, and shook his head with deep culinary sorrow. All this, he said, because men do not keep proper accounts. Yes, I told him, and because they keep improper ones too long. He sniffed and withdrew. Wolfe settled deeper in his chair. The office was once more itself. Books, old wood, lamplight, the worn rug, the desk litter reduced to order. From upstairs there came the faint remembered presence of orchids and Theodore's devotions. Outside, the city kept moving through its own soot and weather and secrets. I said, you know, that scuttle in the hall looked almost ashamed by the end. Nonsense, objects are innocent. Tell that to the murder weapon. The weapon was innocent, its user was not. That is the sort of distinction Wolfe enjoys, because it lets him condemn humanity without insulting furniture. I stretched my legs and looked toward the hall. The odd part is how easy it was. Leave a dirty household object by a door a few Tuesdays in a row, and nobody sees it. They don't question soot. They don't question deliveries. They don't question routine. Everyone agrees not to clean it up. And by then the chain is already carrying messages, debt, and murder under their noses. Wolfe's eyes were half shut. Yes, sometimes the dirtiest trick is the one people accept as maintenance. I let that sit. Then I said, that's nearly wise enough to be quoted. It is wise enough. You may fail to quote it accurately. I always improve you. You always abridge me. We left it there, which was proper. Cases end, but houses continue. The coal scuttle went at last into police custody, to the probable disgust of everyone who had to touch it. Mar went where men go when their clean hands are finally introduced to bars. Kramer got his charges. Helen Ives got, if not peace, at least vindication for a memory patiently kept. Paul and Julia Vanner got each other, which I judged punishment enough for 1 calendar year. Edwin Ralston got the discovery, late and unpleasant, that transactions are not buried merely because the men who profited by them have changed neckties, and Adrian Creel, once Adrian Dale, got what few men deserve and fewer manage, the chance to begin again after telling the truth before someone else improved it for him. As for Wolfe, he finished his beer, rang for coffee, and reclaimed his evening from crime with the composure of a monarch restoring a province. The front hall seemed ordinary again by midnight. The stoop was bare. No scuttle waited there. No dust signaled anything. But I knew better now than to trust a thing merely because it was ugly, familiar, and easy to step around. That was the whole of it, and enough. The coal had had no fire in it. Only debt, memory, fraud, murder, and the usual human belief that grime can hide intention if it is spread thinly and repeated on schedule. It can too, for a while, until Nero Wolfe looks at it, shuts his eyes, and refuses to be as blind as everyone else.